Welcome to Wildly Wealthy Life, the show that's all about exploring the different paths to a life of freedom and fulfillment and how that ripples through your personal life, family life, and to the community. Join husband and wife power couple Lee and Kat Hughes as they share people's stories from different backgrounds and lifestyles about what it means to live a life well lived. Tune in and take that first step to becoming the best version of yourself, personally and professionally, here on Wildly Wealthy Life.
And I would say too, in my, my baby real estate investor journey right now, that was very much, I was glad I took that step a few years ago, because part of it was just, do I have things set up so when I see an opportunity that's attractive to me, I can be ready to make that investment. And that sometimes we get caught up in like, oh, let's go online and look at different properties for sale, and I want to do multifamily, and that's the exciting part, I think, for a lot of people. But then they get disheartened really quick because they're like, oh, it's a $25K buy-in. I don't have $25K, and right. And so you can see how, like, for me, I needed to just analyze, like, what do I actually have, and then what am I doing with that?
Hi, everybody, and welcome back to a Wildly Wealthy Life podcast. And my name is Lee Hughes, and here's my lovely, amazing, stunning wife and co-host, Kat. Who do we have on today?
What an introduction. But,
I feel like I should leave the room.
No, stay. But our guest today is Justine González. I came across her through a book called Conversations with a Team That Creates the Dream by Monique Calm. I really love reading about her. And what I love is that she's an educator and she's a relationship coach, and she loves working with women who want to get into real estate, especially in syndication. So yeah, Justine, welcome to our show.
Well, thank you for having me. Great to be here and excited just to share a little more of my story, but also learn from you all, right? I think one of the things that I realized very quickly when I started down this path of learning about real estate investing was we really can learn a lot from each other. So.
Yeah, definitely. So let's dive into that a little bit. Can you tell us what you do, with real estate or any other things that, fun things that you get to do as, you're trying to build wealth?
Yeah. So, well, it's kind of a loaded question, because I think if you are an entrepreneur, you know that you probably just don't do one thing. But my background was actually a teacher in Indianapolis public schools, and then made my way through district leadership, worked in Chicago public schools as an administrator, and then my last role was with a nonprofit where I was leading 10 high schools. So lifetime educator so far. But when I stepped back from my last position, I had actually had a health scare, and I realized how much I was really burning out, kind of trying to continue on my career trajectory. And thank God everything was okay, but it gave me pause, and that was a lot of the reason I stepped back from my last role, because I thought, well, what am I really building, right? My mission has always been to help kids and to help people, period, transform their lives. But I looked up at my own, and I'm like, well, what am I doing? Like, why am I working myself into the ground? So when I stepped back and I started my company, it's called Educator Aide, my first company, and we just turned 3 years old, but we consult with K-12 schools and do a lot of coaching around understanding identity and culture and who we are. So the relationship part, right? That's the part I've always loved. But in that process, when I had time during startup, that sounds weird to say that I had time, I made it a priority to actually learn more about what to do with my investments, because I had, and I think this is in the book, but by first year teaching, you sit down and meet with these like financial planners, from like the big companies. And the guy asked me when I want to retire. And I said, well, I'll probably always work, but I want to retire when I'm 45. And he laughed in my face. And I was 22. I had graduated a little early from college, already had my own classroom and stuff. And so from that day, I just always contributed to these different funds. Didn't really know what I was doing, was going half broke, but I kept contributing to these different investment funds. So I will say one of the saving graces is that and I feel like I'm down a rabbit hole a little bit here, but I always knew it was important. Just from my grandma and grandpa telling me it was important. Like, we didn't grow up with a lot when I was growing up, but I just remember my grandparents always saying it was important to invest. So I've always had this thought and idea, but until I jumped into being an entrepreneur, I didn't even go through and actually have an inventory to know like what I actually had investments in. And so in a way, it kind of forced me. And that is when I actually just personally reached out to Monique. I had read one of her books. And I said, hey, are you doing any mentoring? And and lo and behold, she was having her first mastermind. And fast forward, like I got to be personally mentored by her, still in touch, obviously, but also be one of the collaborated authors on the book. So anyway, kind of a long story, but I think one of my big goals is if I can help other people find freedom, especially educators. It's not a profession, obviously, that is paid a whole lot. And I think had I had some more know-how, I could probably be even further along than I am now. But just kind of a big picture story of my life right now.
Yeah. And I've been doing a little bit of research like on LinkedIn and just the website for Educator Aide and whatnot. And myself too, I'm in the education field. I'm part of the admissions team for a private college here in the LA area. And the fight that a lot of the instructors and teachers have to, bounce around quite a few different schools, and people think like, oh, like educators, it's like you get like a 3-month vacation at the end of the year, and you got, just like 2 hours at school, and then you're let go. And it's like, no, like you don't know.
Yeah, I always want to say, oh, that's cute that you think that. Okay.
Right. Like, that's so great. But there are so many different rewards from being in the education field. What was it that kind of brought you into that marketplace, that industry?
Yeah. So the interesting thing, I was one of those kids who I had been telling my mom since I was 8 years old that I wanted to be a teacher. I just loved it. And I still call myself like an edupreneur, so to speak, because I still love working with schools. Like, even though I'm continuing to grow and even my understanding of having a business and doing different things, different ventures, at the heart of it, I try to go back to what really gets me passionate in the morning. And it's still that teaching, right? If we don't, and like Lee, you'll appreciate this because you're an educator, and I don't know, Kat, you might think it's corny. I don't know, listeners, but it really is the opportunity that educates all of the professions. Like, you can, it's truly something that you have a long-term impact, whether you end up seeing it or not.
Yeah.
And I think I also realized when I went into school leadership and got to coach adults, as much as that at first can be a little challenging, and you're like, I want to just go back to working with kids. Adults are so difficult. I think that has become something I love, that I get to do all the time now, because now I coach principals, superintendents, and teachers as well. But just seeing that transformation of something, I think that's why I was drawn to real estate investing as an avenue as well for building wealth. You see that transformation of like something that's a seed, and then you get to see it like fully come to fruition and go to full bloom, I guess. But you also have to have patience with that. So
yeah, I mean, you truly
the transformation process, that's what draws me to it and keeps me there.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, you really have, I mean, as an educator, you really have a lot of responsibility in your hand. You have this huge opportunity to be able to transform lives of your students and to be able to shape them, impact them, influence them. I mean, every single word that you get to speak into these students of yours have a potential to either make them or break them. So it's kind of really like it's such a responsibility, and I think that when you really understand that, you get to actually really value it more. And so I think that that's where you're coming from, that you really value your role and you love your role as an educator because you get to speak into these students' lives.
Yeah, and I would just add with that too, then it's also elevating it now to also look at our educators that way, because yes, we get to transform students' lives in a lot of ways, and I think of transformation as you're using the existing parts. So I'm not trying to change somebody or say, oh, I'm so great, so I need to make it better. It is, we are continually evolving in this thing we call life. But I would also say we need to start doing the same. And my encouragement, and even for school leaders, I ask them this question, which can be kind of hard. Can we look at our educators the same way? And I also go back to a younger version of me, who even the interactions with educators from the outside world, those outside of that sector, like one of my first interactions was truly being laughed at in my face because of a goal I said I had to retire at 45, right? And so it was like this thing of like, I know what you make every year, you're never going to make it. So I'm also big on how do we shift kind of that narrative of the value of this profession, and also support people who say, I want to stay in it. Okay, well then why aren't there avenues for helping people build wealth if they're not going to be compensated? How do we educate those? And anyways, I don't know, big talk.
And you found through real estate like another kind of stream of income, but what is that for you? And then what are some other maybe streams that you're looking into or that you're passionate about?
Yeah, so I would still say I am as much as I've invested in my education on the front end, I would still call myself a baby investor. And one of the reasons too is I came out of, I'll share this probably a little more later when we get to some fast action tips. But I collaborated pretty quickly with somebody I had met through a mutual contact. And we got down the road of actually developing like a syndication, had different people involved. I had developed a website, like really dove into it. And this was a couple years ago, right after I had been mentored with Monique. And I realized like we had very different goals. And I think she had a goal of moving really fast. And for me, I still wanted to take my time because I was then assessing, wow, okay, I've actually accumulated quite a few investments that I didn't even realize because I wasn't keeping track when I was still teaching, full disclosure. But one of the things that I was able to learn from Monique was how do I use things like a self-directed 401k, right? How do I actually have access to those funds to reinvest? So obviously when I realized the different amounts I had, I wasn't trying to just hurry up and do something. I was trying to make sure that the numbers made sense. So long story short, that was a great learning experience, but I parted ways in that particular group because I'm like, I think I realized in this process, I really just need to start out much more passively than organizing an entire syndication.
Yeah.
So I have a small portfolio, but it's very much passive right now and spread across the multiple properties. So I would still call myself a baby as far as my real estate investing. I do some stock market things with crypto and things like that. But the biggest thing has just been able to, as an entrepreneur, how do I have a couple different annuities, self-directed IRAs, etc., and actually have access to those funds? Because if this was me listening to this even 5 years ago, I would have been like, what are you talking about? I have a teacher's retirement fund, I think.
Right.
And I didn't realize even what I had been contributing to. And that's not because I was a stupid person, So if you're listening and you really don't know how much you have in your retirement accounts, don't feel bad.
Yeah, I mean, it's just a lot of these things that we are not really educated in. Most of us are not, nobody really teaches us about it. You just think, oh, I'm just going to put money into my retirement, but you don't really keep track of it and all that. What I love about your process there is that you're in one thing, and then you realize that the goals were not the same, but
Yep.
you were clear about what you wanted. The clarity was there. And maybe sometimes it's okay that we kind of run a different direction, and then we realize that it's not what we wanted to do, but then you were brave enough to be able to kind of detach yourself and like pull yourself away from that, and then kind of really take things in stride in your own time. So I think that that's something that is really good to know, because a lot of times we could get stuck into doing something because it's we're with people and we're like, oh, this is what everybody's doing, so let me just
Right.
stick with it and ride with it. But you were very clear, and then you were brave enough to kind of do your own thing, which I love. What I also want to kind of dive into, just for our listeners, can you talk a little bit more about self-directed IRAs and what that is, and just maybe just a little bit process. I think that not a lot of our listeners really know about self-directed IRAs.
Absolutely. And I will also give a disclaimer. This is not legal advice. I am not a financial advisor.
100%.
Not me. So I will say, first I will offer a resource, because I'm all about people educating themselves. One of the greatest resources that I found was through a guy named Damian Lupo. He has a book called Total Control Financial. If you go to the website, you can get the book for free. But that book actually helps you understand what are different types of qualified retirement plans, QRPs. And so when you're looking at, for example, if you have just a basic like teacher's retirement fund, I'll use that because it's my sector, it's going to have very, very slow growth. There's not a lot of diversity in it. And unless you're contributing like large amounts, or you have some type of matching program with your school district or your state, you could be looking at very minimal amounts for when you actually retire. So when you think about like when you hear people say, well, I'm going to roll over my accounts, you're not pulling your money out. So say that you have a retirement fund, but you want to access those funds to invest in real estate or invest in gold or whatever you choose, you can actually roll those funds into what's called a qualified retirement account or a qualified retirement plan. And that's nothing more than also having an LLC to go with it. And so you could do IRA, there's also 401ks, but at the end of the day, you're essentially establishing, for me, it was establishing, I have this separate LLC, and that will only be utilized for real estate investments. Mm-hmm. And the difference with that is if it's self-directed, you can contribute certain amounts, you can have control over it, right? Hence his book title, Total Control Financial. But you also have to then be clear, obviously, on taxes, etc. So even if you use that to generate cash flow from a property, if that cash flow is just going back into that account, you're not actually receiving the funds. So there's a lot of tax benefit. I'm probably not breaking this down crystal clear, but I would say if you're even somewhat interested, start with just getting his free book, because it was very helpful to me. Still not an expert, but I had enough knowledge to really get access to my funds versus having it sit there and collect dust.
Right. So basically, in a nutshell, a self-directed IRA is something that you have a little bit more control over. So you Correct. Can roll funds into it from your 401k or your other retirement funds, and then you get to have control over it. Obviously, there's some requirements and some red tape as to where you can or cannot use those funds for, and that's something, again, for our listeners to really look into and educate themselves. Go get that Damian Lupo book. But in a nutshell, there you have a little bit more control as to where you want to put your funds that can grow as better investments instead of just sitting and not doing anything.
Yeah. Correct. And I would say too, in my baby real estate investor journey right now, that was very much, I was glad I took that step a few years ago, because part of it was just, do I have things set up so when I see an opportunity that's attractive to me, I can be ready to make that investment. And that sometimes we get caught up in like, oh, let's go online and look at different properties for sale, and I want to do multifamily. And that's the exciting part, I think, for a lot of people. But then they get disheartened really quick because they're like, oh, it's a 25K buy-in. I don't have 25K. And right. And so you can see how, like, for me, I needed to just analyze, like, what do I actually have? And then what am I doing with that? And do I have access to it?
Right. So you're coming from a place of understanding your whole financial picture instead of, I mean, it's good to be excited. You know, I think a lot of times we actually start moving because we're excited about something, right? But for sometimes a lot of people will just look into what they can get already instead of kind of just pulling back a little bit, pulling back the curtains and seeing what do you actually have? What can you do with it? Are there creative ways that you can do to maybe help you be set up correctly so that when an opportunity comes, you're able to strike? So that's basically like what you're doing, which is amazing. I feel like that's the educator in you for sure.
I do try to educate myself, but that, again, it doesn't mean, I think that's the other thing when you are first getting into these ideas, it is very easy to get caught up in, I don't know, how they send in the mail those little, like, oh, learn how to flip houses, make 10 grand. Like, people get drawn to like the kind of the shiny object things versus, really establishing your goals. Because for me, my goals are about long-term diversification. I'm 35. And so I am like, okay, where do I want to be in the future? And how can I make sure I have ongoing sustainable income? Kind of starting to envision what ideally in a perfect world 5 years from now would I be having in cash flow every month, right? To replace current projects or endeavors that I engage in as an entrepreneur. So just, I try to think, and I learned, honestly, I learned a lot of that from Monique and some other business coaches I've had along the way, is just that spiritual and emotional component of how much that is tied to money and how we view it. And so honestly, before any education, a lot of my work needed to really do, I read Rich Dad, Poor Dad. Like, I dove into a lot of like basics as far as money, because I just didn't, like, sometimes you don't know what you don't know. You're just kind of living in a certain way or a certain norm because that's what your parents did. I mean, and we don't always stop and ask ourselves, like, wait a minute, why am I saving this way? Why am I making these purchases? Why am I contributing to this fund? And it's honestly, a lot of times it just has to do with, well, that's what we were modeled, or that's what we were told to do. And so I had to break a lot of thinking patterns, even around lack mindset or having fear. Even just, and a part of that too is becoming an entrepreneur, right? You never have to face more of who you are than I think when you become an entrepreneur, because it can't just be, oh, well, Lee, this is his title in admissions. Like, somebody's already told you that, versus every day as an entrepreneur, it's on you no matter what. There's no title to rely on.
I love that. Justine, so where are you at right now with your idea of wealth, and what is your picture for you? You know, like, what is your picture of a wildly wealthy life?
Yeah. So man, what a loaded question. When I think about wealth, I think, to me, the idea of wealth always goes back to freedom, and freedom, not just in finances, but freedom to help others. Freedom to, if you want to take a break from work for a couple days, you can, like, just freedoms that sometimes we don't maybe even think are possible when we're in the thick of a career or the thick of a job. And I know for myself, I never even had a thought about, oh, what if I created my own hours someday? That just wasn't right. It wasn't the world I was in. And so I think getting really clear on what that looks like, part of that is also I have my man and I have been together almost 7 years, and we're looking ahead to wanting to start a family, get a house for ourselves, right? And having those conversations. And so part of our goals have been set together and actually defining. And so I would say that if you're with a partner in life, I think it's important to include them in that process. And I don't want to make assumptions about that, because I also have couple friends who they don't combine finances, or they don't know what's going on in their financial worlds. But for me, that's been really, for him and I, that's been really important. And so we are targeting some areas around the greater Chicago area just for future reference. We both have some ideas around, okay, long term, how do we want to build? So we have a goal set right now that in 5 years, we would like to be having a minimum cash flow from investment at around 10 grand a month, right? Mm-hmm. So like talking through those things, even if right now you're like, we don't know how that's possible, right? Or whatever, before you can even start to map out a plan of action, you have to envision it and you have to get there. And so I would say for me, long term, it just looks like being able to have that freedom to really live where we want, and to help out our families and to really give back to our communities. So I don't know if that's a glamorous answer.
No,
like I want to have
your answer.
5 Corvettes and this and that. I think for everybody it's a little different, and there's nothing wrong with that if it is more material, but for me that just hasn't been part of my thought, I guess.
I think that's like I think that's what's like pushed, through media and stuff, is like the wealth is the, flashy cars and whatever, everybody's in bikinis or shorts running around.
Right.
And it's not
MTV videos.
Right.
Yeah. But kind of in that same vein, not the vein of the bikinis and swimsuits, but in the sense of your goals and that kind of changing as you head towards, wealth. What also, how has the definition of retirement really changed for you too?
I still have that same goal, honestly, about financially. And I feel it's very doable. I've got 10 years until 45, but that's why I've been really working to set up systems, and whether it's through Educator Aide, I have another company with my sister, a whole other branch of things, but like setting up different things so that wealth doesn't just have to be through the real estate investments either. And I would encourage people listening, right? Like it's good to really look at diversification. There's a company that just approached me recently for my education company, and they want me to be a distributor for them, which means that would be solely passive, right? So there's a lot of things I think about when it comes to retirement. And to me, I'm not a person who just sits and does nothing. So it's hard for me to picture just sitting and doing nothing ever. But I think I just realistically want to financially be positioned that by 45, if I were to have to stop working or stop running a company, me and my man still have enough passive streams that we can take care of ourselves.
Perfect.
Right. That, to me, that's the dream. The dream is not some mansion. So that's what's appealing to me, to think about retirement and just really having a life filled with things that I'm passionate about and things that bring me joy.
Yeah. So going back to like earlier when you were saying, just again, the picture of freedom where you want to have, passive income streams that are going to be able to support everything that you are passionate about, but also you mentioned about being able to give into your community. I want to explore that part right now and to just kind of ask you about where in your area right now of like the things that you're doing that you're really passionate about giving into the community and making a difference. Obviously you have your Educator Aide company. Are there other things that you get to do because you just love doing it to serve the community around you?
Yeah, so I helped found a nonprofit 4 or 5 years ago, and I'm still on that board. And then there's another company, a social services company that I'm on their board for too.
Hmm.
So doing things like that, which again, I don't think I ever would have given a thought to. And as crazy as that might sound, even being a school principal, your time is so vested in just your school and
Mhm.
just that community. So I think by getting into entrepreneurship, it's given me a very different view on giving back and also what's possible. I'm big on this concept of overflow, and not just financially, but how do we use our gifts and talents to really impact other people?
Mhm.
Um, and that doesn't just have to be with money, right? So I think a lot of times we automatically think, oh, well, she's talking about having extra money in your bank accounts. No, but if I have a friend calling me, like I have a day planned in a few weeks with one of my colleagues from Chicago, and she's thinking about transitioning out of principalship. And so we're having, her name starts with K, so we're having JK Day. And literally, yeah, literally we're just brainstorming like, what she might want to do, like. And so being able to then offer that perspective, I can't tell you how many educators now reach out and say, well, like, how did you get out? And
Mhm.
not in a negative way, but in a way of like, well, you're still giving back to education, but how did you set up all these other things?
Right.
Because when you are in a position and you want to transition, it can feel an awful lot like you're trapped. And so, go figure. That my hope is that people have freedom. And sometimes that isn't about leaving your job. It's just how do we help people understand what else is available to them?
Hmm.
Right. When you talk about the concept of overflow, is
Mhm.
there one particular instance or example that you can give where you devoted your time or resources or whatever it is, educated like one person, and then what that one person basically went and ran with it, and then it became into this snowball effect of impacting other people in their life because you did that one thing for one person.
Yeah, yeah. The one that comes to mind right away is um, my one of my close friends. We worked together previously, and she's currently still been a consultant with a national company, works with multiple states in the education sector. But about 3 years ago, she told me about this idea, and I helped her a little bit with getting it off the ground. Well, now, fast forward, they've gotten funders for this idea. And I just caught up with her this past weekend, actually, but she has been named like the vice president for all of North America for this company, right? She had done a little stuff with them and presented it to me. And she said, well, how do I formulate this? How do I formulate that? So I think even when somebody comes to you, even just being a sounding board for them, sometimes not even offering advice, but just listening,
Hmm.
makes a world of difference. And I think sometimes we miss those opportunities because it's like, oh no, I'm too busy. What's this person calling for? Or instead of just listening because you don't know what encouragement or motivation they needed, that then that's come to fruition 3 years later. And she's like going to be heading up this company that before was just an idea of a partnership with something out of Australia. Like there's these things that, again, the power of the spoken word, but also being willing to listen to people, I think that can lend itself to a lot of overflow. And sometimes we are not always good about doing that as human beings because we are busy and we're going, and we think that we have connections on Instagram or Facebook or whatever. And yes, that might be a start, but that's very different than like me sitting down with you guys and
Hmm.
learning more, right? Like that's very different than I don't know, just
Liking a post.
watching from afar.
Yeah.
And so I don't know, that was kind of a long answer, but it's just incredible to see, like, and I look back at my own life too, like anything in my life has happened because somebody else planted a seed. It wasn't just by chance. It wasn't just because I did all of this. It's because divinely, this person said, oh, you should be a principal. Oh, hey, have you ever thought about real estate investing? Like
Right.
those things don't just happen by chance. So
Right. Yeah. I love that. I think that what I'm hearing is that you're being very present and being mindful about the people around you and their needs. And it's as simple as sitting down with them and just being that sounding board, and just the things that you get to speak into them actually blossoms into something more than you probably even imagine,
Mhm.
right.
So I love that. Yeah. That's really amazing.
And just the intentionality I think that you carry with you in terms of like a collaboration and really having that vulnerability to learn from everybody and anyone in any conversation. I think that's, I mean, in all of your conversations, you talk about, this person taught me this, and then I heard from this person, but I also know that you're sharing back to that other side of the table,
Right.
in your conversation, and that's
Well, and that was the funny thing, because when Monique said, hey, do you want to be one of the authors of this book? She's like, well, what exactly do you do? And I said, well, I help principals and teachers have better relationships. And so that's right.
Yeah.
So that's why, and that's the one consistent thing. Like I feel strongly I've gotten results over my career because of relationships as the foundation, not because I was just so intelligent or amazing. No, it was because of seeing the value in other people. And I think sometimes we miss a lot of opportunities because we're not willing to share value,
Mhm.
and we're also not willing to take the time to see value in others.
Mhm.
Yeah. So
Great.
taking the time to see value in others is probably something that has really moved you along in what you're doing, because you're having more of a mindset of serving and seeing the gold in people, seeing their
Right,
value, instead
right,
of kind of just pushing your own, hey, this is what I'm doing.
Yeah.
right,
Yeah,
right.
I love that.
Yeah.
So for our listeners that really want to pursue their own idea of a wildly wealthy life, what would you want to say as 3 actionable tips that you would advise our listeners?
Okay. Well, so I love, like, go figure, educators love acronyms. But or like,
You
so
have to have a way to
mine doesn't
memorize
even,
them.
yes, mine is an acronym, but it's 3 C's.
Mhm.
So each word starts with C. But I would say the first one would be collect, and meaning collect information.
Mm,
So that could be any multitude of ways. Start listening to podcasts, start reading books, start watching, stuff on YouTube. Just start to collect information, and at the same time, be open to other avenues. So when you're collecting, don't try to be like one brained, right? Don't try to be so zoned in on one lane that it's like you have to do it this way, and this is the only way I'm going to do it. Try to be flexible with yourself in that process. The second I would say is connect. So you should be, like, I'm sure you guys have probably heard, your network is your net worth. But go figure. I'm definitely big on relationships, and not just from the net worth standpoint, but even when we think about the concept of social capital and how you're able to leverage different relationships, how you're able to give back to them. So I would say the second is to connect. So be making connections with people. There's always something that you can learn, always, in every situation, every encounter, every day.
Yeah.
But we also have to be in a place where we're self-aware enough to, like, be like, oh, that was interesting. What did I learn from that? And then the third I would say is collaborate. So be willing to collaborate with others, whether it's outside your comfort zone, or maybe you feel like I felt a little strange reaching out to Monique because I had read her book, and I was like, well, is she even going to respond to me? But I'm like, well, the worst she can say is no. So I think when you're willing to collaborate and learn from other people's genius, that is when God starts to open up other doors
mm,
for
Yeah.
so many other things. And then be willing to collaborate with others, and it's okay if in those collaborations you realize, oh, we have different goals. that's not a bad or icky thing. I think some people think, oh, it's uncomfortable, but that's not bad. It's just part of learning. So I would say collect, connect, and collaborate.
I love that, because honestly, I feel like as you're saying it, I'm kind of piecing the puzzles together in our life and just realizing that's kind of like what I did. I mean, we collected information about real estate and how to build wealth through real estate, and not just real estate, but like through other means, sources as well.
Right.
And then, so you collected it, and then you were like, you said connect. And so when you said, as far as, connecting with other people and knowing, that there's other people that you can not just rely on but really learn from and like
Right.
glean from, and same thing as you, even just with the podcast, this is literally a collection of things that we've learned, and we're trying to connect with people, and then we're trying to collaborate and reaching out to people. And every time I email someone, I'm always like, well, the worst thing that they could say is no.
Right.
But every single time I email someone, I'm thinking, why would they say yes? I mean, we're nobody. Like, it's like we're just starting this podcast. Like, we some people are even asking for links for our podcast, and I'm like, we don't have any yet. But anyway, all that to say that nothing will really be done unless you actually collaborate with people, because you can't do anything alone. You really can't. And
Right.
even just this podcast, we have to interview you, to glean from you, to get your knowledge and your wisdom on these things, and these different topics. And so I love those tips, because I think that they're really something that we do actually for all of us every day, but we probably just don't realize it, that that's what we're doing. We're collecting information, we're connecting, and we're always collaborating with people. So thank you for that. I love that.
You're welcome. Well, and we can choose to look at it as good or bad, right? Like on a cloudy day or a bad day, we might say, oh, do I have to talk with this person? Whereas again, a lot of this goes back to, I think, our mindset and our outlook. But the connect phase too, I think, is also about being willing to connect people with resources.
Right.
And so beyond even just connecting with people, can you get plugged into resources? And then likewise, right, can you give back at some point? And that's one of my bigger visions, is to help in some way, whether it's through online courses or whatever, which I've built in other realms, right? But is there a way then that we can have this movement where educators can actually learn very either free or low cost about investing? And I wouldn't even just limit it to real estate investing, because I look at the resources that were available, and it might be differently at the higher ed level, but I look at K-12, and it was just whoever got assigned to your school with some big name. And it wasn't, there's not a whole lot of resources to know, oh, I could be building wealth in other ways. Just because I don't make an incredibly large salary doesn't mean that I can't be building wealth in other ways. And so I'm really passionate about that's a bigger vision, but I know that that's planted inside me at some point as a way to give back to educators too, because I wish I would have had more guidance with that.
Yeah, with our just where I work, I mean, a lot of teachers and just the faculty and staff members too, like we have conversations fairly often about like just money and investing, and where is your money going? Because like they see me all the time. I have my like bag lunch, peanut butter and jelly. Some yesterday actually, it was funny, but they they're like going out every day spending $10, $15, $20, $30 on a meal, and I'm like, guys, that's like 10 grand when you do the math on it for the whole year. It's like, you got to know where you're going. But that collaboration, they're starting to like, oh, okay. And I see them like making changes.
Right.
Just that interaction that has to happen. So, but that brings us to
almost the end of our show.
Yeah.
Almost. We love
Right.
our quick 10 rapid fire questions that we ask our guests. These are questions that some of them are related to our podcast theme. Some of them are just fun facts that we want to ask about our guests.
Okay.
We want you to say the first thing that comes to your mind. Don't censor yourself, and just keep your answers quick and concise. You ready?
Okay.
All right. Number one, if you could choose one book to live by, what would it be?
The Bible.
The Bible. Awesome answer. I love that.
That was my choice. Your personal hero, living, deceased, someone you maybe know or don't know.
Wait, say that one more time. Sorry.
Your personal hero, living, deceased, someone you know or maybe don't know.
Personal hero is my dad.
The one thing that you intentionally have to do every single day.
Intentionally every day. In the morning, stop and if I don't journal it, but actually consciously be grateful, like just actually name and specific things I'm grateful for in conversation with God.
Yeah.
Even if I don't formally write it in my journal.
Yeah.
What's one hobby that brings you the most joy?
One hobby that brings me the most joy is my podcast with my sister. My sister and I have a podcast, actually.
Fun. And what is it called?
It's called the Sunflower Society. We were basically having weekly conversations about us starting businesses, and we're like, oh, well, we should just record this because other people might be interested to know. So we have a blast doing it. We're about 30 episodes in, but yeah, it's called the Sunflower Society because a sunflower produces thousands of seeds, and even if one of them is germinated, it has then the capacity to produce thousands more. So our whole
That's
shtick.
beautiful. That's really beautiful. I love that. Number 5, most rewarding thing that you've done for someone in need.
Sent money anonymously.
Nice.
Yeah, it's good.
So to what ministry organization, but just actually giving money, or even just in the mail to friends if I knew they needed something, but just sending something anonymously, so it just shows up.
Yeah,
it's
cool.
That's awesome.
The first movie quote that pops in your head.
I'll be back. I don't know why, but I have to be honest. It was the first thing, like, I'll be back.
Yeah, we just interviewed someone who said the same thing.
Oh,
That was so great.
I would love to have like some kind of psychological study about that. Because, man, it's like imprinted. I don't
It's
even
ingrained in us. I love that. Last big purchase you made for yourself.
Last big purchase, probably I went to Bali in January, so my trip to Bali.
Ooh.
Yes.
It's a favorite place of ours. Food you cannot live without.
Food I cannot live without would be cheese.
You said cheese, right?
Cheese. Yeah, cheese.
Oh, hey, cheese. All right.
I love cheese.
Number 9, what is your spirit animal?
My spirit animal is, I would say actually like a koala bear.
Ooh.
I feel like they're very protective and grounded, but they also just have kind of like a peaceful, like they just always look like they're kind of smiling.
I love that.
All right. Number 10, the last one. Finish a sentence. If I'm stuck in an island by myself.
I would want Thaddeus there, not be by myself. Thaddeus is my guy. I don't know if that was really fair, but
it's okay. We'll take it. We'll take it. Oh, I love that. Well, thank you, Justine, for just being with us today and sharing your knowledge, your wisdom, just your heart with us today. I really love speaking with you. Where can people find out more about you? And if there's anything that you would like to encourage our audience to give into, whatever that could be, whether that's just in their daily life or a charity that you support, that you want them to check out, what is that?
So first off, if you want to give to a great organization, my friend started a nonprofit in her daughter's honor who passed away. They are based out of Houston, Texas, and they're called the Mila Foundation, MILA. Mm-hmm. So if you want to give to some place, I always encourage people to get there. And where else am I? I'm on LinkedIn, Justine González. You could, if you're an educator and you're interested in resources for your school, you can check out my company website. That's educatoraide.com. And then, check out my sister and I's podcast too. The Sunflower Society. Yeah. But yes, on a lot of different platforms, but I just appreciate the opportunity to connect with you all and hopefully collaborate more in the future.
Yeah,
Sounds good.
for sure. All right. Thank you, Justine. Well, Justine, what can I say? She is so adorable. She is so adorable. I just love talking to her. I love her heart, first and foremost. I just love how she talked about coming from a place of overflow, and that the overflow is not in terms of finances. It can be, but that it's not just in terms of that it is also in terms of your energy, your resources. So when you serve other people, to come from a place of that you always have an overflow of your time and your resources and your energy to be able to invest in other people and help them out.
What I really love is her entrepreneurial spirit and what she's been able to gain and learn personally from the opportunities that she's really created for herself. She's done a lot of great work in the education field, being a principal and leader in the different education markets in Chicago, and how that's influenced so many other people. It's just really awesome to see the ripple effect in her life and her realizing how she can impact those around her. We're excited to see you in another episode of Wildly Wealthy Life, where we have Doug Berninger, who has a master's degree from Bowling Green State University in kinesiology. He is a competitive weightlifter and strength trainer, helping people build up their own strength and personal health, and now helping people with their wealth. He's got a lot of awesome tips, both from a strength training perspective and a life perspective on wealth and finances. So tune in next week, and we'll see you soon.
Thank you for tuning in to another episode of Wildly Wealthy Life. We hope that this episode has helped you take another step towards living fully, giving freely, and building a legacy that deeply impacts your community. We'd love to hear what you think about today's show. Please leave us a review or like us on iTunes and YouTube, and click the subscribe button so you won't miss a show. You can also visit us at wildlywealthylife.com for today's show notes. See you on our next episode. Thank you, and may you live a wildly wealthy life.